We're back, part 3, Dear Esther commentary, and we're about to head into the caves.
Did Jakobsen crawl this far? Can I identify the scratches his nails ruined into the rocks? Am I following him cell for cell, inch for inch?
So I wanted to talk a bit about the fact that the Chinese Room, the developer of this game, had a showing at Gamescom 2013 in Germany during the Sony press conference, and they revealed a game that will be a timed exclusive for the PS4 called Everybody's Gone to the Rapture. And it looks very similar in tone to this game. You're walking around and so forth, but the trailer begins with a computer dialogue prompt that has something about initiating some sequence, and then the sequence failed to initialize properly, and then it cuts to like a 1950s, 60s rendition of the world after the rapture has already happened. And so it clearly continues to deal with those religious things, because it's literally about the rapture occurring. And it looks, really cool. Got lots of applause, if I remember correctly, and here's some people talking about it. So I look forward to playing it. But anyway, so we're in the caves now, and we're going through this space, and we have only a little bit of voiceover, really. It's a lot less voiceover and more just walking around. I think there are maybe 5 blips of voiceover that we're going to hear as I talk over most of them, but again, you should have already played this because I'm just spoiling everything all at once, really. Yeah, we're traversing the space through these caves. The narrator has fallen in, and he injured his leg in the past part, and he's sort of slowly traveling through this space. It's more or less a path, A to B path, with a few of these detours, which make it seem like it's not a linear path, but it basically is. But I kind of like... There's something weird about traversing these imaginary spaces. I feel like traversing a space in this way, I feel like I remember it in a way that one wouldn't remember such a space in film. Space in film is only about setting, and there's no sense of actually feeling the space and understanding it and actually being able to experience an emotion just because of the space. I mean, in real life, I feel like there's spaces where I feel emotion because of the space. Being in the darkness in the woods alone, that's a space that, where film tries to get that, but it's just sort of an analogy in film, that sort of loneliness and spookiness and so forth. And the time that you devote to that in film, usually you have an economy of time that you just can't revel in that for very long, usually. So again, this is one of those things that games are able to do that film just isn't able to do. I mean, to have a sense of space and for that to impress upon your role as fulfilling the role of the character. It's just something that games can do that's hard to do in film. And it's just a difference between the two media. And this is a game that I think exploits that to a great degree, and where the use of space actually matters a lot. And a game that sort of plays on the experience of space in a game and how that sort of affects your thinking and sort of implies something of a narrative is a game called Antimatter. And it's basically a world where Euclidean geometry is broken down into nonsensical shapes. So the spaces that you're traversing are sort of nonsensical, but that's mainly just sort of a gameplay aspect. It doesn't, I mean, it has a sense of playing upon your emotions and so forth, and there are these sort of aphoristic poems that you encounter sort of sprinkled throughout the world where, you know, once you realize that your initial expectations have been confounded and that, you know, you've sort of been played upon, these poems come in and sort of give meaning to those experiences. Similarly to the use of space in antimatter, Inception does kind of the same thing as far as using space in a way that's sort of nonsensical, but it's not really used as any kind of storytelling technique. It's just sort of fodder for the plot, so I don't know what there is to say about it. Similar to antimatter, how it's fodder for gameplay. And you'll see it in art too, that uses video as its medium of expression. But all this talk about the use of space and so forth, there are a few other things to talk about as far as, you know, whether it's a matter of narrative or a matter of gameplay, as we've talked about with antimatter. I think a common problem that needs to be solved in game design is thinking about how to get the player to look where you want them to look and so forth. I mean, the player is free to do whatever they want, but if you're telling a story, you want them to look in sort of certain directions. I don't think that it's necessary in a game like this to worry about it so much for a few obvious reasons, and maybe for a few reasons that aren't so obvious. First of all, if you're thinking about a typical objective-oriented game where you're trying to complete some sort of task or so forth, then what you're typically doing in space is you're doing things like looking for keys or looking for power-ups and so on and so forth that allow you to progress through the game. I mean, that's what the genre of Metroidvania, if that's a word, is all about, is finding all the things you need to keep on moving to the next part of the game. So you have these common motivations in games for exploration, and it's normally finding items, be it necessary items like keys and so forth to progress, or, you know, if you're a seasoned player, you're also just going to explore every facet just to find every power-up, every weapon, and so forth. And so there's a common motivation there, but this game has none of that. So what we're seeing is a different motivation for exploration, and I think it sort of affects the player in a different way because the motivation is completely different. Once you're invested in the story, you know, you want to find details to sort of solve the puzzle, solve the riddle of what's going on and so forth. And but more than that, I mean, particularly in this cave scenes, it's so beautiful that you just want to see every bit of it. You want to soak in every ounce, even if it doesn't make sense to you. And we're in the bottom of the well here. We can look at these coins and see that we're probably at the bottom of a well that we saw early in the second part that we just walked past after the shipwreck. So yeah, your motivations for exploration here are more emotional and more about the experience and less about any kind of objective-oriented way of thinking about the game than you'd usually be prone to do in a typical game experience. I think what that implies and what that sort of necessitates this sort of different approach is that rather than the developer sort of holding the player's hand throughout this, there's more of a soft touch going on, a lighter touch, and I think that works in a game like this, and it actually, I think, enhances the value of the game, because if you become at all invested in the game, you're going to want to replay it to see all these details and so forth. And that brings up the topic of, you know, it's not just the case that there's less VO in this part, but in all the parts, the voiceover that's there, the narrator is giving details, and these tracks are actually random. And I don't know, I mean, I guess there are people who don't realize that, play it once and don't even see that there's variation to be had in the dialogue options. But for instance, we didn't get details in this playthrough pertaining specifically to what happened in the car accident. There's one bit of dialogue very early on in this chapter, and the alternate bit of dialogue that we didn't see, where the narrator is explaining the experience of how he's on the highway and basically watching, presumably, Esther being cut from the destroyed car. And if you just play through this once and you get the playthrough that we got this time, then you would just never see that. And so this is typically something that's called replay value, where you're able to, you know, play the game over and over again and see different things and so forth, and it adds to that, and that's, you know, that is a way to think about it. But I do think it's problematic because what you end up doing is you're framing this game in terms of something like a dishwasher, where it, you know, it can wash so and so many loads, and, you know, this one's better than that, and so forth. And that's really, I think, a deprecating way of thinking about games, especially if you're, you know, a proponent of thinking of games as a legitimate art form. But we're approaching the end here. This is a point in the game here where, again, we've got this waterfall, and you can see back there, it looks like we might be able to cross here. We've got this biblical verse, but we cannot pass through here. It's one of these detours, these tricks that the game plays on us. And we'll find ourselves here. This is the stretch of the highway, and this is one of those events where there's a very specific alternate option that you can get here. So I'm going to include that at the end of the video, and I'll talk about it there. But this version, you know, we have this medical gurney here, and it looks like maybe there's a blood transfusion on the rack there. And we're also seeing these coins here, and, you know, I'll just point to the Maurice Maeterlinck thing and Anno's Epiphany, as I've called it before, where there probably are multiple meanings here, and maybe it's not intended for you to just get one specific meaning, but, you know, the coins, wishes, you know, it's pretty clear what the narrator would have wished for in this vision. But to conclude my thoughts about space and its use in video games, I do think it is an obvious fact that because the player is allowed to traverse the space as they choose, and the designer can use the space and design it in a way to express whatever they want, this is something that is different. It's a difference in the medium between film or television, because, you know, you're only ever giving a light touch. You're only ever implying where the player should go, and you're only ever basically in the back seat as a game designer to what the player will ultimately conclude about the space and about the story and so forth. And this is where this chapter normally ends. We'll be going on to the next chapter at this point, and here's the drop off into the next part. But there is an alternate thing that you can see in the water, and I thought I'd give a sense of what one of these alternate takes is. Here we go, diving again. And what we find here is the actual accident. So this is more of a literal interpretation of the events, as opposed to just having medical gurney. And again, if you only played this the one time, then and if you only got the medical gurney, you know, you wouldn't really have any knowledge about this at all. But maybe there are a few things to actually conclude from the scene here. The car back there is facing the wrong side of the road because we're in England, as far as we know. So maybe this was some Samaritan that stopped and checked on you, or a car that was originally following her. But I guess maybe this leads credence to the idea that, you know, one was a drunk driver. You know, there were multiple cars involved, and one was a drunk driver. I'm not sure. But that basically concludes this chapter. Again, thanks for watching. Rate, subscribe, like. You can follow me on Twitter at Walt Duncan. And we'll be back next time.